Do you have to embarrass me everywhere we go? Julian's voice was low, sharp, meant only for her, but pitched just loud enough that the nearest tables could enjoy it too. Look at you. I bring you somewhere nice, somewhere that matters, and you sit there like a fat embarrassment. I have an important client here tonight. Do me a favor and don't open your mouth. Clara Beaumont set down her water glass. She did not flush, did not shrink, did not do any of the things 20 years of men like Julian had trained women to do. She simply looked at the watch on his wrist, the one he'd been flashing all evening, and said very calmly, "The Patek on your wrist is a fake. A good one. Which makes me wonder what else you're about to sell as real." Julian went pale. At the bar, 12 feet away, a man in a dark suit who had been ignoring them both set down his drink and turned his head. Clara Beaumont had spent 19 years looking at beautiful things and telling people the truth about them. She was a gemologist and an appraiser, the person auction houses and insurers and very wealthy, very nervous people called when they needed to know whether the thing in front of them was worth a fortune or worth nothing at all. She could tell a lab-grown diamond from a mined one across a table. She could spot a recased movement, a recut stone, a forged hallmark, in the time it took most people to admire the shine. It was a quiet skill, an invisible one, the kind nobody noticed until the moment it saved or cost them everything. And Clara had learned long ago that the world looked at a heavy-set woman in a department store dress and never once imagined that her eyes were the most expensive instrument in the room. She had agreed to this date the way she agreed to most things lately, with low expectations and an open mind. Julian Vance had been charming online, generous in the way of men who want to be seen being generous, and for about 40 minutes she'd given him the benefit of the doubt. Then the wine had loosened him, and the real Julian had surfaced, the one who needed her to be small so that he could feel large, who had brought her to an expensive restaurant not to share it, but to perform in front of it. And somewhere in the middle of being told she was an embarrassment, Clara had glanced at his watch out of pure professional habit, and the evening had quietly stopped being about her at all. Because the watch was a forgery. And Julian Vance, who had no idea that the woman he'd just called a fat embarrassment could read his wrist like a confession, was about to close a deal at that very restaurant with the most dangerous man in the city, who was now, from his seat at the bar, looking at Clara with the first real interest he'd felt in a very long time. To understand how a first date turned into the unraveling of a multi-million-dollar fraud, you have to back up about 3 hours. To the moment Clara Beaumont decided to give Julian Vance a chance she already half suspected he didn't deserve. They'd matched online a few weeks earlier. He was handsome in photographs, fluent in the language of expensive things. And he'd talked, on their 2 phone calls, about working in fine acquisitions, moving art, jewelry, and watches between private collectors who valued discretion. To most people, that was just glamour. To Clara, it was shop talk. Because fine acquisitions was adjacent to her own world, and she'd spent 19 years on the authentication side of exactly those transactions. She'd thought, when she said yes to dinner, that at worst she'd get a pleasant evening, and at best she'd meet someone who actually understood why she lit up about a flawless emerald. She had not expected to spend the evening being used as a prop. Because that was what she was, she'd realized within the first half hour. Julian hadn't brought her to Mirabelle's, one of the most expensive restaurants on the waterfront, because he wanted to know her. He'd brought her because a man dining alone looks like he's waiting for something, and a man dining with a date looks established, settled, trustworthy. She was set-dressing for a performance, and the audience was a single empty chair he kept glancing toward, and a phone he checked too often. Julian was waiting for someone, a client, the important one he kept mentioning, the one she wasn't supposed to embarrass him in front of. Clara, who had spent her career being underestimated by men who mistook her quiet for simplicity, did what she always did. She watched. And the more she watched Julian, the more the gemologist in her started cataloging things that didn't add up. The watch, first, a Patek Philippe he wore like a billboard, except the second's hand swept a hair too smoothly, and the dial's printing sat a fraction too crisp, the small wrongnesses of a very good replica trying very hard to be right. Then the case beside his chair, a slim leather portfolio he never let touch the floor, that he rested one hand on, the way people rest a hand on something they're afraid of losing. And then the way he talked about tonight's deal, not like a man brokering a sale, but like a man running out a clock. She didn't say anything. A good appraiser never announces the first flaw she finds. She keeps looking, because a single fake watch could be vanity, but a fake watch on a man carrying a guarded portfolio to a high-stakes meeting was starting to look like something with a shape. So Clara sat and let Julian think she was cowed and assembled the pieces quietly behind a pleasant, patient face. By the time the wine had turned him cruel, she already suspected that whatever was in that portfolio was the actual point of the evening, and that it was very probably not what Julian was about to claim it was. What she did not yet know was who the empty chair belonged to. The man at the bar had arrived 20 minutes earlier and ordered a single drink he wasn't really drinking. His name was Raphael Moretti, and the restaurant had gone subtly, expensively tense the moment he walked in. The staff a little quicker, the manager a little paler, two unremarkable men taking a table near the door without ordering anything at all. Raphael had not come to Mirabelle's for the food. He'd come because a broker named Julian Vance had spent weeks promising him a collection. A set of rare watches and stones, papers and provenance included. The kind of portable, liquid wealth a man in Raphael's position valued precisely because it could move quietly across borders when cash could not. Tonight was supposed to be the handshake, the final look before the money moved. And Raphael Moretti had survived 20 years in his world by trusting his instincts about people. And his instincts about Julian Vance had been quietly itching for a week. The man was too smooth. The provenance documents had arrived too polished. Raphael couldn't have said what was wrong. He was a dangerous man, not an expert. And the difference had nearly cost him before. He'd come tonight, half intending to walk away from the deal on feeling alone. What he had not expected was to sit at the bar, nursing a drink he didn't want, and overhear the broker he'd come to meet call his own date a fat embarrassment, and then watch that same woman glance at the broker's wrist and say, in a voice as calm as still water, the one word Raphael had been unable to prove for himself: fake. He set down his glass. For the first time all evening, Raphael Moretti was interested, not in the collection, not in the deal, but in the heavy-set woman 2 tables away who had just looked at the man trying to sell him a fortune and, in a single glance, read the lie underneath it. The important client finally arrived. Except he didn't arrive at all, because he'd been at the bar the whole time. Raphael Moretti simply stood, crossed the restaurant, and sat down in the empty chair Julian had been guarding all night. And the look on Julian's face was the look of a man watching 2 separate worlds collide in real time. The date he'd been humiliating, and the buyer he'd been performing for, now sharing one small table. "Mr. Moretti," Julian recovered fast, sliding into the smooth register Clara had heard all evening. "I didn't see you come in. Please, ignore my companion, she was just leaving. Shall we discuss—" "She stays," Raphael said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He turned to Clara, and for the first time someone at that table looked at her as though her opinion was the most valuable thing in the room. "You said his watch is a fake. I've spent a week unable to explain why this deal makes my skin itch, and you did it in one glance. So," he folded his hands, "tell me what you see." And Clara, who had spent an entire evening being told to keep her mouth shut, opened it. She did not start with an accusation. because an accusation was just one person's word against another's, and she'd learned long ago that the word of a heavy-set woman lost every contest it entered. She started instead with the watch, because the watch she could prove sitting right there. "May I?" she said, and without waiting for permission, she lifted Julian's wrist, turned it to the light, and narrated what she saw the way she'd narrate it to an insurance board. "The sweep is too smooth. A genuine movement at this grade has a specific cadence, and this one's running a cheap high-frequency clone. The printing on the dial is crisp at the edges. Authentic enamel has a faint softness under a loop. This is laser-etched. And the lug here," she tilted it, "has a casting seam. Patek does not leave seams. This watch cost maybe $400 to make, and he's wearing it to look like a man who deals in the real thing." She set his wrist down. "A man's watch is his sample. You wear the fake to sell the fake." Julian's smile had frozen into something brittle. "This is absurd. She's a bitter date trying to—" "The portfolio," Clara said, ignoring him entirely, speaking to Raphael. "He hasn't let it touch the floor all night. Whatever's in it is what he's selling you. May I look? Because if his sample is a forgery, Mr. Moretti, I'd bet my license the collection is too, and you're about to pay real money for it." Raphael looked at Julian. He did not ask. He simply held out one hand, palm up, and after a long, sweating moment, Julian, who understood far too late that refusing was its own kind of confession, surrendered the portfolio. Clara opened it on the white tablecloth, slid a small loop from her own bag — she carried one the way other people carry keys — and went still over the documents and the velvet trays of stones and watches, the way a surgeon goes still over a body. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath. "These provenance papers," she said quietly, "are beautiful. Genuinely good work. But the watermark on the certification is from a Geneva lab that closed in 2019, and this document is dated last spring. The stones—" she lifted an emerald, turned it under the loop. "This is a synthetic, hydrothermal grown, maybe $2,000 retail, papered as a $40,000 natural Colombian. And this one—" she stopped. Her voice changed. Not dramatic, just careful, the way a person's voice changes when the small fraud turns out to sit on top of a much larger one. "This necklace. I've seen this necklace. It was in a stolen property bulletin 8 months ago, taken in a private collection robbery in Geneva. It's not just fake provenance, Mr. Moretti. Some of these pieces are real and stolen and laundered through forged papers, so that when you buy them, you become the man holding stolen goods with a paper trail that points at you. He's not selling you a collection. He's selling you a liability with your name on it." The table went silent. Julian Vance had stopped pretending to smile, and Raphael Moretti turned slowly to look at the broker who had spent weeks earning his trust, and who had just, an hour ago, called the one person on earth capable of seeing through him a fat embarrassment, and tried to send her home before she could open the portfolio. "You brought her here as a prop," Raphael said softly, almost wonderingly to Julian. "And she's the only honest thing you put on this table all night." His dark eyes moved back to Clara, and there was something in them now that had nothing to do with the deal. "Which leaves one question, Mr. Vance. If you knew the collection was stolen, who are you really working for? Because a man doesn't move product like this alone." Julian Vance did the thing cornered men always do. He stopped defending the lie and started attacking the person who'd exposed it. "You're going to take her word?" His voice climbed, that particular shrillness of a man feeling the floor tilt. "She's nobody. A bitter, jealous— Look at her, Moretti. She's a sad little appraiser I matched with out of pity, and now she's blowing up a deal because I hurt her feelings. You'd ruin a partnership over the wounded ego of a fat— Be very careful, Raphael said, about the next word. Julian shut his mouth, but the damage he was attempting was clever in its desperate way, and Clara recognized the shape of it because she'd seen it her whole career. The pivot from "the evidence is wrong" to "the woman is unreliable." It worked, usually. It was the easiest trick in the world to make a room dismiss a heavy-set woman as bitter, hysterical, jealous, and Julian was betting his freedom on it landing one more time. It didn't land. But what happened instead was something Clara hadn't planned for, and it changed the night again.
Because Raphael Moretti was now a man who understood that he had nearly bought a federal-grade liability with his own name on it, and a man like Raphael did not simply walk away from that. He needed to know how deep it went, and he needed, suddenly and inconveniently, the one person in the room who could tell real from fake. He turned to Clara, and the question he asked was not a request. "I'm not letting this walk out the door until I understand it. You're going to help me understand it." A pause, and then, because he was a man who'd learned the hard way what trust cost, "I'll make it worth your evening, but you're in this now, whether either of us planned it or not." Clara should have said no. A sensible woman, she knew, would have taken the ruined date as a story to tell her friends and gone home to her cat. But she looked at the necklace on the tablecloth, the stolen one, the real one, the one that meant somewhere a collector had been robbed and a forger had built a beautiful lie around the theft, and the same thing that had kept her in this business for 19 years stirred in her chest. She didn't walk away from a lie once she'd seen it.
"I have conditions," she said. "I'm an appraiser, not a criminal. I'll tell you exactly what's real, what's fake, and what's stolen, because that's what I do. But I won't be part of anything that puts stolen goods back into circulation. You want the truth about this collection? You get all of it, including the parts that are inconvenient for you." She held his gaze. "Those are the terms." Something flickered across Raphael's face, surprise, and underneath it, the beginning of respect. People did not set conditions for him. "Agreed," he said. And so, over the wreckage of the worst date of her life, Clara Beaumont went to work. She walked Raphael through the collection piece by piece, sorting it into 3 velvet trays, fake, real, and real but stolen. And as she worked, a picture assembled itself, the kind of picture she'd learned to read across 2 decades of looking at what objects quietly confessed about the people who handled them. Julian Vance was not the architect of this. He couldn't be.
The forged provenance was too sophisticated, the stolen pieces too well chosen, the laundering scheme too patient for a man who wore his fake watch like a teenager showing off. Julian was a salesman, a face, a charming front of house for someone who stayed in the back. "This isn't yours," she said to him, not unkindly, almost clinically. "You don't know enough to have built it. Someone hands you a portfolio and a script and a list of buyers, and you smile and you sell, and you take a cut. Which means the moment this deal went wrong tonight, you became a problem for whoever's actually running it." She glanced at Raphael. "He's not the danger to you. He's a liability to someone far more careful. Someone who's going to hear very soon that Julian got caught, and is going to have to decide what to do about a salesman who knows their name." Julian had gone grey, because Clara had just said aloud the thing he'd been refusing to think all night, that the people he worked for did not tolerate exposure, and that an hour ago, in front of Raphael Moretti, he had become exposed. The bravado drained out of him completely. "You don't understand," he said, and for the first time all evening his voice was honest. "If they find out the Moretti deal collapsed, if they find out why—" He stopped. He looked suddenly like a much younger and much more frightened man. "Then you have a choice to make," Raphael said, and there was no warmth in it. "You spend the rest of tonight telling me everything. Who built this, who you answer to, where the stolen pieces came from. Or you walk out that door and take your chances with the people who'll be very interested to learn
You lost their collection to an appraiser on a dinner date." He leaned back. "I'd think carefully. She's the only person at this table who's been honest with me all night, and she's the reason you're still sitting upright. You might consider being half as useful as the woman you called an embarrassment." And Clara Beaumont, set dressing, prop, the fat embarrassment who was supposed to keep her mouth shut, sat at the center of a collapsing criminal scheme she'd cracked open with a jeweler's loop and a refusal to be made small, and understood that the evening was no longer about a bad date at all.
It was about finding out whose stolen empire she'd just walked into the middle of, and getting back out before they decided a gemologist who could identify their entire inventory was a loose end worth tying off. The architect of the scheme did not wait to be found. That was the first thing Clara learned about the person behind Julian. They were fast, and they were already watching. Because Julian's phone, sitting face up on the tablecloth between the velvet trays, lit up at 9:40 with a single text from a contact saved only as V. And Clara, who read everything, read it upside down before Julian could cover it. "Moretti just called off the buy. What happened?" She felt the cold arrive before she understood it. "Mr. Moretti," she said quietly, "you haven't called anyone. You've been sitting here the whole time." Raphael's eyes moved to the phone, and the same understanding landed on him a half-second later. The deal had collapsed less than an hour ago, at this table, in this room. No call had been made. There was no way for anyone outside this restaurant to know the buy was off, unless they were being told from inside it. Which meant the architect didn't just run Julian. The architect had eyes in the room. Right now. "Someone here works for them," Clara said. Her voice stayed level, but her mind was moving fast, cataloging the room the way she cataloged a tray of stones. The too attentive waiter, the manager who'd gone pale at Raphael's arrival, the couple 2 tables over who'd ordered nothing. They put a watcher on the meeting. Of course they did. A collection worth this much, with a buyer like you? They'd never let Julian close it unsupervised. Someone in this restaurant has been reporting to V all night, and they just told V the deal died. She looked at Raphael. Which means V now knows there's a problem at this table. And in a few minutes, they're going to start wondering who caused it. And then the night turned, the way these nights always did, against the woman who'd seen too much. Because the watcher in the room had reported more than the collapsed deal. When Julian's phone lit up again, the message was longer, and Julian read it, and the blood drained out of his face. And Clara understood that the trap had just reversed onto her. "They're saying," Julian's voice cracked, "they're saying you set me up, that you're not a date, that you're a plant, an appraiser Moretti brought to burn me and take the collection clean. They think you're the operator." He looked up, genuinely frightened now. "V wants to know who you really are, and V doesn't ask twice." It was, Clara had to admit, elegant. In the space of 2 text messages, the architect had taken the one person who could expose them and recast her as the villain of the story, a professional sent to destroy Julian and steal the goods. A heavy-set stranger who'd arrived on a dinner date and somehow dismantled $1 million deal in under an hour. Of course she looked like a plant. The truth, that she was exactly what she appeared to be, a gemologist on a bad date who simply couldn't stop seeing what was in front of her, was almost too ordinary to believe. She could feel the room reorganizing around the lie. Even Raphael's men had gone still and watchful, recalculating whether the honest woman at the table was honest at all. This was the moment. Clara could feel the floor going out from under her, the old familiar trapdoor of being a woman whose word the world was always primed to doubt. The human thing, the panicked thing, was to protest, to insist, to swear she was nobody, just a date, just a gemologist. And she knew, with 20 years of hard-won certainty, that protesting innocence was exactly what a guilty operator would do, and that it convinced no one. So she did the opposite.
She went very still. She set down the loop, and instead of defending herself, she solved the case. "You want to know if I'm a plant," she said to Raphael, calm as still water.
"Don't take my word for it. My word is the one thing that's worthless right now. Take the evidence. A plant sent to burn Julian and steal this collection would have done one of two things tonight: kept quiet until the deal closed and the goods were in hand, or made sure she walked out with the portfolio. I did neither. I blew the deal up before a single dollar moved, in front of you, with the goods still on the table. The worst possible move for anyone who wanted to steal them. I didn't take the collection. I told you it was stolen." She let that sit. A thief doesn't hand you back the things she came to steal. I'm not V's enemy or their operator, Mr. Moretti. I'm a woman who looked at a watch. The only person who benefits from making me the villain is the one person who needs you looking at me instead of looking for them. Raphael was silent. She watched him weigh it, watched the cold, careful mind that had survived 20 years run the logic and find it clean. And then she gave him the last piece, the one only her eyes could have caught. "And here's how you find V," she said. She reached into the open portfolio and lifted the stolen necklace, turning it under the light. Every laundered piece in here was repapered by the same hand, same forged lab watermark, same certification template. That's not a network. That's one forger working alone, because a forger this good never shares the method. Find who had access to a defunct Geneva lab certification stamps and who's been quietly repapering stolen high-end pieces for resale, and you don't just find Julian's boss. You find the one person whose signature is, invisibly, on every fake in this case. She set the necklace down. I can read you that signature off any piece in this collection. The watcher in this room can't stop me from doing that. And that's the real reason V suddenly needs you to believe I'm the enemy. Because I'm the only person alive who can point at the work and name the forger. And across the room, the too attentive waiter, who had not refilled a single glass in 20 minutes, set down his cloth and stepped a little too quickly toward the kitchen and the back exit. And Raphael Moretti, without taking his eyes off Clara, lifted one hand, and the two unremarkable men by the door rose to block the way. Because the watcher had just made the same mistake everyone made about Clara Beaumont all night. They had assumed the fat woman on the bad date wasn't really paying attention, and she had just described their entire operation off the back of a stolen necklace, in a voice that never once rose above calm. "Stop that man," Raphael said quietly. "I think the lady would like to read us his employer's signature." The waiter gave up the name faster than anyone expected. Frightened men always do, when the people they fear are suddenly less close than the people in front of them. And the name landed in the quiet of that restaurant like a stone into still water. "Ashford," he said. "Vivian Ashford." Clara went very still, because she knew that name. Everyone in her world knew that name. Vivian Ashford was one of the most respected appraisers in the country, a fixture at the great auction houses, a woman whose certification could add a zero to a sale, whose word the entire industry treated as gospel. Clara had sat in the back of Ashford's lectures as a young gemologist, taking notes, half in awe. And it made a terrible, perfect sense, the way the truth always did once she let herself see it. Who else could forge provenance flawless enough to fool the trade? Who else had access to every defunct lab's stamps, knew exactly which stolen pieces could be quietly repapered and resold, understood the authentication system intimately enough to defeat it? It took the best appraiser in the world to build fakes the trade couldn't catch. Vivian Ashford hadn't just been certifying real treasures for 30 years. She'd been laundering stolen ones right alongside them, hidden behind the one signature no one ever thought to question. "That's how she's never been caught,"
Clara said softly. Nobody audits the auditor. The whole industry is built on trusting her eye. So she sells stolen goods with her own forged provenance, and the buyers feel safe because the papers carry the most trusted name in the business. She looked at Raphael. She made one mistake. She built fakes good enough to fool every appraiser in the world, except she didn't account for one of them, being on a dinner date with her salesman, close enough to look at the work without knowing whose work it was. She trained me, Mr. Moretti, 20 years ago. I learned to spot forgeries by studying the real thing. I just never imagined the teacher was the forger. What happened to Vivian Ashford did not happen in that restaurant, and it did not happen quickly. It happened the way the most permanent things in Raphael Moretti's world happened, patiently, with documentation, through channels.
Clara gave a full accounting of every piece in the portfolio, which were fake, which were stolen, which collectors they belonged to. The stolen pieces, quietly, found their way back toward the people they'd been taken from. And Vivian Ashford, whose untouchable reputation had been her perfect armor, discovered that the armor only worked while no one with a better eye was looking. And that someone finally was. Her certifications began to be re-examined. Her 30-year signature began, piece by piece, to come undone. The most trusted name in the trade became, very quietly, the most investigated one. As for Julian Vance, Julian, who had called Clara a fat embarrassment to look large in front of a client, Julian spent the rest of that night talking and the rest of that year learning what it cost to be the disposable face of an operation whose architect had just been exposed. Raphael found Clara by the coat check as the restaurant emptied, the worst date of her life finally, mercifully over. "I have collections," he said. "Real ones. Things I've acquired over many years that I've never been entirely sure about, because the people I trusted to authenticate them were people I had no real reason to trust." He paused. "I'd like to put them in front of someone whose eye I watched dismantle the best forger in the world over a single dinner. The position is yours, on whatever terms you want. Name them." Clara considered him. This dangerous man asking, not telling, the way she suspected he rarely did. "Here's my term," she said. "I tell you the truth about every piece, even when the truth is that something you love and paid a fortune for is worthless. Especially then. You don't get to be angry at the eye for seeing. That's the whole point of the eye." A faint smile. The first easy one of the entire evening. "I spent tonight being told to keep my mouth shut so I wouldn't embarrass a man who turned out to be a fraud. I'm done keeping my mouth shut for anyone. If you want my eye, you get my honesty with it. They're the same thing. Take both, or neither." "Both," Raphael said. And the most dangerous man in the city inclined his head to the gemologist the whole restaurant had watched be humiliated 3 hours earlier, as though she were the one doing him the favor. Which, of course, she was. And that was how a woman who'd been called a fat embarrassment on the worst date of her life looked at a $400 watch and pulled a thread that unraveled the most trusted forger in the world. Not because a powerful man rescued her, but because she had spent her whole life being underestimated and had learned to turn the one thing the world used to dismiss her into the sharpest instrument in any room. They looked at her and saw someone not worth listening to. It was, every single time, the most expensive mistake they would ever make. A fake watch. That's all it took. One glance at one fake watch by the one woman everyone in that restaurant had decided wasn't worth a second look. So tell me in the comments, did you spot the tell before she did? And here's what I really want to know. Has anyone ever underestimated you because of how you look and been completely, spectacularly wrong about it? Tell me your story below. I read every single one. If Clara's eye gave you chills, do me a favor and subscribe, because the next woman they underestimate is even more dangerous than this one. I'll see you there.